Hello, Writing Workshop. Sorry about the strange location change on our videos here. I've got a kidnapping in the room that I was filming my last couple videos in, so I had to change up a little bit here. I hope you recognize this painting up on screen. This is Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh, one of the most famous paintings in our world today. I want you to take a moment to kind of internalize this painting, take a look to see if you can spot a theme first, of course, but then also think about how Vincent van Gogh brings out that theme. I will admit, I am not a fine artist at all. I don't really have a fine artistic bone in my body, nor am I a pro at art analysis. I know a little bit. I'm able to piece together what I know from literary analysis, but I'm going to keep my analysis pretty simple for the sake of this video here. Some of you might be better art analysts than I am, simply because you have some of those artistic chops that I don't have. Again, take a moment, analyze this, or take a look at this painting, see if you can spot a meaning or a theme behind it. Also think about how Van Gogh brings out that theme. Feel free to pause the video, because I'll start analyzing on my own in just a moment. And back to my document right here. So I've been using the same document. My computer defaults it to whatisthetheme.docx right here. Always the two questions we ask with analysis. One is, what is the overall meaning or message or theme? The second one is, how does the artist develop that theme or meaning or message? It's about the what is this about, but it's also about the how. How does the artist develop that idea? Now, with art analysis especially, very, very open for interpretation. So you might look at Starry Night and see a very different message than I saw right here. But whenever I think of this painting, I think of God. I look at that starry night sky and I see that as evidence that God is creator of all and that God is above all. I would argue that the theme of this work, the theme of this painting, is that both heaven and earth alike proclaim who God is. Again, Vincent van Gogh's techniques bring out that theme. Some things to look at technique-wise, and we'll look at these piece by piece here. The first thing I would suggest is, and one of the art terms that I actually know how to use well, is focal point. The focal point of a piece of artwork is wherever the viewer's eyes are drawn first. I can kind of point that out in this image. My eyes are always drawn first to this night sky. Sometimes I look first at the moon because it's the brightest object in this entire painting. Sometimes I look at this massive swirl in the center right there. Just so happens to be dead center of the image, which helps. But if we think about the focal point of this image, notice how our eyes are drawn to this magnificent night sky. Notice how our eyes are not immediately drawn to the community, the town below. And we would think that the town, just being as the civilization in this piece, might be most important, but the focal point would suggest that the sky is what should be taking our attention right here, not the town below. Focal point actually ties in with an artistic term called perspective. Now, perspective it's a mix of where things are placed in the image, but it's also the size of them, the scale of how elements within the image relate to one another. One thing we might note, especially in this image, is that all the natural elements are much, much, much larger than the man-made elements. This is especially true about the cypress tree that's in the foreground of the image, so I'll point that out. So obviously the sky is huge in this image, and then there's itty-bitty earth below. These hills kind of raise things up on this side of the image, but the town below is tiny. The biggest item in this, or the biggest element of this image, is this tree that's obscuring our view right here. I did a little bit of research on this image. That's a cypress tree that was right outside of Van Gogh's window. So this is actually a scene that he painted. Obviously, he kind of dolls it up a bit for the sake of artistry. He goes above and beyond what he's actually seeing in the sky. But notice this tree is in the foreground. The sky is in the far background, and then we also have the humanity, the earth, the land, the town below. Although we can draw a basic connection to theme, right? Notice that nature kind of takes place over civilization in this. Again, heaven and earth alike proclaim who God is. Notice that nature, the heavens declare the glory of God. Notice that the sky, the tree, the hills especially, they show that they are grander, they are bigger, they're more magnificent than little humanity's town in the bottom of this image. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Let's talk about color. Color is always a great thing to at least try to take a look at in an image. Not a whole lot of different colors going on in this image. There's a lot of shades of blue and varying shades of blue. There are dark blues, there are light blues, there's like very, very whitish blues, and there's some blacks as well. There's dark black up here in this hill, and then the cypress is a rather dark color as well. We're also noticing some browns for the town below and some whites too. The other thing that we might note color-wise is that there's a contrast. There are also these bright yellows kind of dotted throughout the image. They're here in the sky, the bigger lights in the sky. Then there's also these windows, these glowing windows below in the town. That's going to be important for the sake of analysis too. So color-wise, notice a contrast between those darker tones, those blues and blacks, and also the yellows. One thing we might suggest artistically is that Van Gogh uses that contrast to draw our eyes even further to those yellows. If this whole image was filled with yellows, we wouldn't be drawn to the moon. We wouldn't be drawn to these dozen or so stars. We wouldn't notice these little windows that are glowing in the town below. A couple other things. Brushwork is the last thing I would think of artistically in this image. Now, once again, I'm not an art critic, so I'm not an expert on all the terms of artwork. But one thing that really stands out in this image is the different brush strokes that Van Gogh uses. Notice he's mainly got these large swirling strokes, right? These are big brush strokes right here that he uses. Or there's a whole system of tiny brush strokes that look like they're bigger strokes. Notice that there are some small linear strokes as well in the bottom. The ground right here is made of lines. Notice that the town is drawn realistically with lines as well. It's almost like there's a split between realism in the bottom, but then everything else in nature is painted very surreally as well. Interestingly enough, that little bit of brushwork actually lends itself to a little bit of literary analysis too. Now, I just wanted to show you that even in paintings, we can see elements of literary analysis, things like symbolism. In this painting, we've got some juxtaposition, which we'll talk about in a moment. You can look for some of those poetry and short story elements in paintings. They're a little bit harder to spot, but they do exist. Juxtaposition is taking two unlike objects and finding the similarity between them. Let me suggest to you that there's a big similarity between the tree, the big thing in the foreground of the image, and the church in the town. So notice right here, the tree and the church are two very unlike objects. The church is built by man, it's tiny, it's white. The tree is built by God, it's natural, it's very large in this image, and it's dark. But notice the big thing they have in common, they're both pointing up. And notice how that ties in with our theme, that heaven and earth, heaven, creation, nature, and earth alike, humanity, churches, man's work, they both proclaim who God is. They both point upwards. That's the biggest thing that sticks out to me in analyzing this poem, is the similarity between those two rather unlike objects. The fact that they're both pointing up for me seems to suggest that Van Gogh is telling his viewers of his artwork to look up above as well, to look at who God is and consider what he's made, and consider what he's instructed man to make, like church, in order to proclaim his glory too. That's something to notice in this image, right? All this natural magnificence declares that God is God because he created it all, but even humanity below, even humanity has those little lights. Even humanity has the church that points up. Everything in this image points up to God. Just some things point up to him more magnificently than others. We can use that to form thesis statements too, and I'll do two. I think the main thing I want to do in this one is focus more on big picture artistry and also small picture artistry in this one. So again, I want to discuss the themes. I'm just going to do a kind of a traditional one. Let's talk about perspective right here. So I might say, let's do as a simple sentence, I might say, Vincent van Gogh uses perspective in Starry Night to proclaim God's glory, the glory of God. I need another sentence to draw that a little more in depth here. So I'm talking about perspective. Natural elements are larger than man-made elements. The cypress trees in the foreground. Juxtaposition is what I'll play with here. Not only are the natural elements larger than the man-made elements. I've used theme a lot to highlight this message. There we go. Vincent van Gogh uses perspective in Starry Night to proclaim the glory of God. Not only are the natural elements larger than the man-made elements, but the tree and the church are juxtaposed to highlight this message. This one might lend itself to 2 body paragraphs. Talk about perspective in general, foreground, background. Talk about how the natural elements, the tree and the sky especially, are painted to look larger than the man-made elements. But also we can talk about juxtaposition in the next body paragraph as well, and how even though the natural elements in this painting are bigger than the man-made elements, both of them point to who God is. In my second thesis, I'm going to focus more on the nitty-gritty things. Let's talk about color and brush work here. One thing we might notice is that contrast exists in all of these things. So I might say something like, for thesis 2, I'm going to imagine that I've already mentioned the artist's name in my introduction. So I could say something like the colors and brush work of Starry Night contrast in order to demonstrate how both heaven and earth declare who God is. I wanted to do a 1-sentence thesis as well. So notice in this art analysis, I did one thesis, one essay idea that's more big picture, using perspective in general, talking about everything in the image and how it works together to proclaim God's glory, especially the natural elements and the man-made elements. The second thesis I used, this 1-sentence thesis, is a little more based on individual, smaller artistic decisions. Things like the contrasts in color from those blues and blacks and whites and yellows. The brushwork, the big swirling brush strokes as opposed to the smaller linear ones in the bottom. Even though they do contrast, they do demonstrate how both heaven and earth together, despite their differences, declare who God is. Those work for analysis. Again, could we go deeper? Absolutely. Maybe if your teacher was a little more of an art expert, we could. But I hope this gives you a good start or an idea of how you might analyze a painting.